Today, I'm delighted to welcome Eloi Casali, Media Lead UK and Ireland at Uber. With nearly 20 years' experience in media and marketing strategy, Elwa joins me to delve into the strategies that help Uber maintain its status as a global powerhouse, the importance of strong brand image for standout, and the innovative marketing tactics that help Uber at the forefront of the industry. Welcome, Elwa. Thank you so much for joining. An absolute pleasure that you're here. You've got a very interesting role. You know, some would say almost unique, but sort of always when we do these podcasts, how we sort of like to start off is just asking our guests their background, where they've come from, how they've actually reached this point. So your story, please.
Lovely. Well, thank you for having me today.
Yeah.
It's great to be here. So I've been in the media industry for about 20 years. I started my career in search engine marketing when Facebook and things like that weren't even a thing. They didn't even exist. And there was all this kind of explosion of new platforms coming to the forefront. And quite quickly, that started being the basis for doing all digital marketing, which back in the day was purely boxed into performance marketing. And then the offline was the branding side of things. Those lines consistently changed over the years and things like that and have evolved. And I got to a point where I started managing all channels, whether they're online, offline, branding and performance, because the lines between those things were really blurring and effectively we're all going into the same direction.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've really sort of progressed sort of as throughout your career. And when it comes to Uber, it's a business that has got some, some might say almost unique challenges when it comes from a advertising and marketing standpoint, because most products, most services, are fairly straightforward in what you're offering. But obviously you're across several different verticals and it's a little bit of a different sort of activation point and so forth. So could you just talk about the sort of particular challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating business to work in, especially from a marketing perspective. And everything the business does is about pushing the boundaries and going further and finding new ways to help consumers move effectively and move the products that they want to get, etc. So it's an amazing space, but it's very different to other industries that I have worked in the past. And the best example of this I can give is that when you work on, for example, a CPG, an FMCG, something like that, your product, if you're lucky enough, if you're big enough, is pretty much in all the supermarkets in the whole of the UK. So you can do your advertising and your marketing on a national level and reach all the consumers as much as possible with all the economics and the effectiveness behind that. But at Uber, we're slightly different because we are based on because of the way that our business model is structured, we might have a different level of offering in this area of the country to this one. And that's just due to, for example, the number of restaurants we have on board, the number of earners, and even the consumer demand coming from different areas of the country. So it's a fascinating space because you have to treat regions of the UK in very different ways, whether it's in terms of where you're going to put your effort, your time and your attention, or how you're going to show up in those spaces and what you're going to be saying to consumers to convince them in a different way.
And that is interesting because you say you're a mass market product, but in a way you have to act as though you're not.
Yeah, I'd say we're a mass brand.
Yeah.
And then the product side of things, that's where there are differences. Our product is fantastic in some areas and needs development in some other areas. And that creates fantastic challenges in media and marketing because you want to be able to target those separate audiences differently and talk about different stories.
Yeah. And it's if you look at the sort of media mix that you have, and sort of obviously you advertise across platforms, and you've run some sort of major out-of-home campaigns recently as well. Could you just outline how you look at the mix of platforms, the sort of things that for you are the most important, what you find works the best, and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been my entire career, effectively, is either back when I was working in agencies, is either advising clients on how to reach their audiences and now doing it for Uber. And I think the difficult thing in this space is that you have that matrix of you want to reach your target audience, but the media mix is completely changing every year, every 5 years, every decade. Things are radically changing, and you've got to find new ways of reaching your consumers, which means new ways of creating creative and driving effectiveness in those areas. And so it's really evolved over time. And where we're at today is it's a fantastically interesting media market. And so there's this fascinating shift where offline media is expanding and digital media is actually contracting to get more pound per person and pound per advertiser. And it's a fantastic place to be, but it's constantly shifting. So huge amount of education internally for our businesses to say, hey, these are the new platforms that are being looked at.
And I think there's a couple of questions that sort of evolve from that. The first one that I'm actually going to ask is just on, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because, chances are I probably am on this. But I would imagine just going sort of both in terms of the products you offer, and as you say, you're a mass brand, but also as well this whole idea that essentially there are different messages according to different parts of the country. Does that pose any particular challenges, for example, in areas such as measurement and the effectiveness of campaigns?
Of course. It's obviously much easier to measure things in a uniform way at a national level, one big MMM, one big brand tracker at the national level. But I think that's where what makes us different from a product perspective is actually a huge strength for us. Because when you look into all the measurement approaches, effectively the one thing that really sticks out is doing incrementality testing with advertise and control regions, right? And that's actually aligned to our product.
Yeah.
There are areas where we don't want to advertise, or we shouldn't do it just yet. We'll go there in 6, 12 months. And there are areas where we need to be very heavy. And that creates contrast zones for us to look at business metrics and understand the impact of that campaign versus the control group. So a lot of people need to advertise nationally, like we were talking about FMCGs, and struggle to do that control and test.
Yeah.
But for us, it's bedded in to the way we grow as a product, and therefore it really helps us understand the impact of our communications.
I mean, that's actually a fascinating sort of concept on that. And maybe that's something to come back to at some point. But also as well, sort of, you talked about your career and sort of how things have progressed and so forth. Also wanted to pick up on that because, if you look at what's happening with digital fragmentation, you look at the sort of new products that are coming on. Now we've got, for example, 2025 seems to be, I'm slightly skeptical on it, but seems to be the year of the influencers, certainly in the messages that have been pushed and so forth. When you have this changing digital landscape, and as you say, having to explain that to people internally, how do you find that when you're having the conversations with the C-suite?
There is a big job of education to be done. And I think the advantage in the media space is that it's a fairly rational space. There are still emotions and markers of quality amongst media platforms. But ultimately, you can always fall back on the numbers to say, hey, these guys are reaching X amount of our target audience. We just can't ignore that.
Yeah.
Whereas the creative space is so emotionally charged that some people can like something and some people can hate it. Yeah. But in the media, we've always got those numbers to fall back on and bring it back to rationality.
Yeah, that is sort of quite an interesting point, I think. And someone gets missed, I think, when it comes to this whole debate as to, people just think it's about the numbers, but actually there are other factors as well that have to be looked at as well. I mean, you're a business that started off in the US. And, one might say that in a way that you obviously have a global brand. You could also say as well that you have a global product sort of, on here. And I'm just interested, I don't know if you can say anything on this or not, but when sort of you speak with your US colleagues about their sort of views of where they should advertise and the advertiser mix sort of, and you compare with Europe, what do you think are the most sort of interesting points that come out of that?
So that's fascinating. So Firstly, a little point for you. I don't know whether you know this, but do you know where the idea for Uber came from? Which city in the world the idea came from?
No.
It came from being in Paris.
Right. Okay.
The city where I come from, where I grew up. And basically, people were struggling so much to get a taxi that they thought, why don't I have an app where I can get a car to come to me? And that's how the concept for Uber started.
Okay.
So it's an American company, but the idea of it was born one night in Paris sort of thing, which I love. And you have, therefore, that international footprint. And yes, to your first point, it's very important that we have a global product that looks and feels the same across all markets so that when people are flying from LA to Paris, they can land in Paris and still have the same Uber experience that they had in LA.
Yeah.
Familiarity is very important. The UI, etc., is very important. And then in the way the US does things, we learn a lot from what the US does. It's a huge market. There are lots of similarities with European markets in terms of the way cities and the densities of cities exist across the globe. Yeah. And therefore, we exchange a lot of tactics between areas of growth, where we should target, where we should go into. And we learn a lot and we exchange a lot of this. And I think it's a big strength of ours to understand, for example, at a very basic level, which platforms for advertising are very good at ingesting, for example, postcode data. And we share all of those learnings across all of our markets because the platforms we advertise on are also global and universal. So we're all working in the same direction and slightly different objectives by market, but generally we're all going in the same direction.
Okay. And I want to come back to the point you said before about the sort of because of the way you are in terms of you almost as well, you need different marketing for different sort of parts of the country. And you made the point that enables you in many ways in terms of campaigns and flexibility to do things that sort of more mass market, more national brands can't do. From your standpoint, does that tend to lead more to, I guess you could say it's sort of switching from sort of campaign to campaign or tactic to tactic? Or do you tend to have sort of, even though you've got, as it were, these mixes which come in, and you're finding different results are coming in from different parts of the country, that you tend to have stability in what you do?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So I think what we're seeing generally, and this might be a particularity of the UK, and this is why I think the UK is fantastic, is because for example, the accents that you have in the UK, we've done a lot of consumer-focused work where, talking to regular customers out there, we've realized that nobody or very few brands, for example, use regionalized and localized accents for their creative. And when we talk to the specific consumers, they say they feel that brands are quite far away from them emotionally and to their heart because they are speaking always in a London English accent. Even when your ad is in, Newcastle or Glasgow or areas like that. And so what we do is we try and show and dial up our relevance to the consumers by building proximity with them and using local accents. So at the moment, for example, we have a campaign running in a number of cities, let's say predominantly in the north of England. And that is one video that has 14 different audio tracks to relay the exact accents of every city. And that really helps the message cut through a lot more and build proximity with people's hearts and with people's minds so that we breed familiarity. And when people come into a category entry point, they think about us first. Yeah.
And that's actually fascinating. I was going to say, I'm glad you clarified about the 14 different accents. I was going to say, don't use the Manchester accent in Liverpool, whatever you do.
I know. Yeah. And that's the difficulty of it from the media perspective, is making sure that things are rightly targeted.
Yeah.
Because do you want to target with a radius? Do you want to target with postcodes? All of these things become very nitty gritty to make sure that we have the right accent in the right place.
Yeah. Yeah, if I think about, for example, when I'm ordering something from a food delivery service, you know, we're all humans. We all tend to go, as it were, the simplest solution, and sort of what automatically comes in your brain. So you almost as though need to have something sort of, it needs to be implanted in your brain, as it were, beforehand. It can't be done, as it were, at the time of purchase, because that's too late. So can you talk about sort of how you do that in terms of your brand and making sure that you're at the forefront of people's minds when they're thinking about ordering a taxi or ordering something to eat?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. It's so important to us as a brand, and it's so important to the category, because as you said it, that moment you get home and you sit on the sofa and you pick up your phone to make your order, we need to win the moment before that.
Yeah.
And that's really important, so that we become the app of choice and the first one that people open when they think about browsing. The way to do that, it's kind of like retro planning. The way to do that is to build that emotional connection with people and make sure that they love you for the stuff you're putting out there, for the messages, for the positioning that you have, rather than just being purely rational. So it's tapping into that system one to make sure that those emotions stay stored in people's memory structures for much longer. And if we're able to convey or to drive brand love before that eating occasion, then we know we will be the first app to come up. And we've seen that as well in a lot of business numbers and industry numbers, where you see a big correlation between love and business growth and market share and metrics like that. And that can often feel lofty for for CEOs and people looking at spreadsheets and pieces like that. But it's actually incredibly effective to tap into those emotions in order to drive that salience and be top of mind.
When you speak with particularly CFOs, because for me, I do a sort of prompt here. I do a training course on how to speak the language of the CFO. Yeah, and I do see time and time again, just in CFOs are looking at things from a different perspective than people in the marketing team. And often what you can get is that you can get cross conversations, and this whole idea that a marketing person thinks they're explaining something very clearly, whereas they're speaking in a completely different language to what the CFO is. So how do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's about bridging that language between the two. Just like different teams have different objectives, we're looking at slightly different things, but we're looking at the same things. Or we're looking at the same thing, but we're just looking at it onto two different lenses. Yeah. And I think between marketing and finance, I think the crux of the discussion is around the length it takes to get returns. And that's why you have, in some businesses, very short-termist CFOs who really focus on the this month, this year type of comics, things like that. And then you've got businesses who have understood the role of marketing in the long-term growth of the business, who build things differently in terms of how they structure their investments. And I remember having a fascinating conversation with a CEO in a previous business, not at Uber, where we were showing this. We were showing from an MMM perspective, an incrementality perspective, and an attribution perspective that whatever lens you were looking at things were working really well. And we were generating a ton of money for the business. And the CFO wasn't convinced. Just, again, emotional mental block that advertising and marketing doesn't work. Just because that's the world. I don't know. Something must have happened in their life, And so we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll turn off half the country and we'll leave half of the country on in terms of advertising, and we'll show you the difference between the two sides of the coins. And that difference is the incremental uplift that marketing is driving. You know what the answer for the CFO was?
Go on.
I don't want to risk it.
Yeah.
And they don't want to risk half the country going dark and losing sales, which underlines the fact that they believe this stuff works. Yeah. They just don't want to risk it. And so that's why I think CFOs are people like you and me, and they have different views on things. And some of them are very short-termist, either due to them, their experience, or their business. And some of them are much more bought into the long term. And on that front, the ones who are more bought into the long term also see the value of investing in brands, just like you would invest into a data platform or an internal system that's going to help all of your teams work more effectively in 2 to 3 years.
And CFOs, their key role is to meet the numbers.
Yeah.
And to meet the numbers, the easiest way to meet the numbers, if you've fallen behind on sales, is to cut the marketing spend. It's very quick from a spreadsheet perspective.
Yeah.
Not saying it's the right, I definitely don't think it's the right thing, but from a spreadsheet perspective and so forth, it has an immediate hit, and it's easy to convince yourself that it doesn't have a impact on sales, at least over the short term. So
yeah, and I think that's where you have somebody who's very short-termist, and sometimes things happen where you need to remove some of that marketing spend because you're in Q3 and you need to adjust the balance sheet, and that will always happen, right? That's always going to be a case of it. But I think the difference is when you're looking at that return to come into your books, and that's the biggest difference. That's why you have often adjustments in budgets at the end of the year for any business, right? But also the ones who believe in that long-term growth would allow some of those bets to set in. But I think one of the biggest things we bring to the CFO table as well is showing them how people feel about various brands. Because if they understand the point that we need to be top of mind and first choice before people need our service, then that helps the CFO understand the value of driving metrics like consideration for our product, and the penetration of that consideration across various audience groups or geographical groups. Yeah.
When we're talking about the changing mixes, sort of within marketing, the different platforms that are coming through and so forth, how do you get the balance right? Yeah. Maybe a tricky question.
No, it's a great one. And I mean, we work with our agencies on media planning. Our agency PhD is fantastic and has got some great tools in order to understand the potential geo-targeting capabilities that we could be doing. But it's a tricky thing to do. So we have, obviously, like every business, rough guidelines into place, but effectively we try and leverage as many channels as possible with some thresholds within that, because we see that the more channels you add, the greater the multiplicative effect of your IMC, your integrated media campaign, is going to be. Obviously, you don't want to be spending too little in channels that you're absolutely invisible, but we see diversification as a very key factor. Within that, you then have roles for specific channels. So you take a Netflix, you take an Amazon, who are kind of taking so much of the budgets from traditional broadcast TV players because they're exploding in that space. Yeah, that's incredibly important to drive that top of mind awareness right at the specific time you want. For example, prime time during the end of the day, etc., etc. And then you have fantastic channels like out of home, which can do both, where you have some incredibly impactful formats that make you feel something for the brand, also makes the brand feel local and relevant to you. I think that's often a very interesting point. We're very quick to turn to digital and target that geographically. I'm going to target Manchester, but the second you put a billboard up in Manchester, things feel different. Yeah. And the Mancunians feel like you're there, you're present. Yeah. So that physical presence, or digital nowadays, if it's a digital billboards, we feel that that's really important to show up and to show people that we are there locally by their side. And that's kind of the big impactful formats of out of home. You also have the digital 6 sheets, for example, which acts as quick, fast reminders to bring that awareness back to the front of mind and make sure that we remain top of mind all of the time. So it's one of those channels that has a number of formats and tactics you can use to impact people in a different way.
I'm going to finish with your favorite ad campaigns. So, and why sort of you like them?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's difficult. There are so many. I am genuinely in this industry because I love marketing and I love advertising. Like genuinely, when I started in this industry and I could see I could do things and then see the numbers go up. That was amazing for me.
Should we therefore sort of I know that's too wise, but should we just concentrate on your particular category? It doesn't have to be just Uber.
Yeah.
You can mention the other players as well. But what to you are the campaigns that you've seen have stood out?
With Uber Eats, we've just launched in February our new campaign, which is about effectively enabling downtime and building an emotional connection with people to help them feel like they can have that downtime, and that ordering food for delivery when you've had a very long day at work and you're just absolutely exhausting is fine. And it's about removing those barriers of guilt that you may have when ordering food on delivery, because sometimes you just need to reward yourself with something nice, whatever it may be. It could be a sushi, it could be a Caesar salad, it could be absolutely anything, right? But it's okay to not do cooking sometime if there's something amazing on telly and you've had a long day. And I think a lot of our industry is focused on trying to give discounts and really talk about saving 50 pence here or there on a delivery fee, and effectively things work much better if we go with the grain, and we kind of help the consumer feel like their choice is the right one. That's fine, rather than trying to rationally get over that point with a discount. So that's and that's why we really try and be close to people's hearts and minds. And other than that, I mean, some of the campaigns we've seen work really well in terms of the industry itself out there is, I think, for example, the brand wrapper that Tesco have got on everything they do, which is the whole every little helps. And we look at that brand platform as something that really bleeds through all the communications that they do, whether it's the top level brands, the Christmas ad and pieces like that, all the way through to giving you recipes and very small incremental discounts, which over time ladder up. We understand why they're building these codes and what's the importance of that for them. But that's the positioning of a company that really presses and allows to kind of grow the business results of the company.
And I am going to end on this question, which we ask of every single guest on this, which is, what would be the piece of advice that you would give to people in the industry or somebody starting off or whatever?
That's a really good point. So something I've learned when joining Uber is Uber is an incredibly collaborative business. It's the sort of business where you can just go up to anybody in the open space, tap on their shoulder and go, what are you working on? How can I help you? And the doors open immediately. That spirit of collaboration has been absolutely amazing and transformative. And I've seen literally the business change direction in about 2 weeks, when some other business would probably take about 2 years to do that, because everybody is so aligned. And the reason I'm saying this is because I think what I would tell people is always look over the fence. Always look over the fence at what other people are doing, other departments are doing. And in our world of media and marketing, I would say the biggest thing I've seen coming up in the past 5 years is the blurring of things like tactics between brand and performance marketing. And a perfect example of that is, well, we talked about it, about doing mass brand marketing, but with slightly tailored creatives by cities. And that would have traditionally been a tactic that we're, no, that's performance marketing. We're tailoring assets. We're doing dynamic creative. All the topics of dynamic creative, DCO, segmentation, incrementality, all of these things are now coming into the brand's marketing world as very strong and valid tactics that we should be looking at on every single brief. It's not anymore about the mass number and the cheapest CPM. It's really about being more effective in branding. And I think we're taking a lot of tactics from the performance world and applying them to branding nowadays. And I think that's a fascinating space. So if you're a brand marketer, I would say, look at what performance has been doing over the past years and see if you can find some parallels between the two. In the same way, if you're working in performance marketing, look at what brand has been doing. We've got brand campaigns that perform extremely well from a ROAS or ROI perspective. And that's just showing that consumers don't care which budget pot a set of communications comes from. They just see things and they engage with them either physically or mentally. And as a marketing department, both brand and performance are pushing in that direction. They always work much better together.
Oh, well, that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. It's a pleasure.
Lovely.
Thank you, Elwa. It's been fantastic to hear about how Uber's strategy continues to evolve, driving brand love amongst customers with brand building campaigns that push the creative boundaries. If there's anything you would like to ask us or hear more about, you can visit the JCDecaux Marketing Hub online. We hope you enjoyed listening, and wherever you get your podcasts, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.